Okay, hello and good morning. I have completed our techno-economic model for vanillin production. What I have done is created process models for cell-free lignin, cell-free eugenol, cell-free ferulic acid, fermentation eugenol, and fermentation ferulic acid. We can then compare those by through a direct cost comparison with a bar chart like this that then also shows the cost breakdown. As you can probably guess, with these high feedstock costs for vanillin that we've been discussing, the largest cost factor comes from the feedstock. So you can see here, like fermentation with ferulic acid. That dark blue / black top bar is the feedstock cost, right? And then it dominates that. It dominates the fermentation cost. Ferulic acid for our cell process again dominates the cost. For Caravel, eugenol, right there. But then if we do lignin, then wha-bam! Suddenly, the feedstock cost is much lower, and we have all the other advantages of cell-free, and so suddenly our prices drop a lot. I'm going to walk you through this model so you can have this video to retain it and consult again in the future. And if you have any questions, just let me know. To preface this model is not perfect. It is high resolution. Sorry. It's low resolution. It's from a bird's eye view, low resolution model. So let's start with fermentation from ferulic acid. I start with a lot of important parameters around our fermenter's volume and size, how long the fermentation takes, how long the fermenter is down between fermentations for like run cycles and stuff. We have the cost of glucose to make cells, the yield of cells on glucose, so we know how much cell we have to make. I make an assumption here around how many cells we end up using. Effectively, I maximize like the amount of cells you can make on glucose, because that's what you would do at scale. So that's the biomass concentration of 0.18 kilograms per liter. Then, sorry, that's too much detail for you. Okay, higher level overview. Other important things are, the feedstock cost here, how much feedstock goes into a tank, because the process can only tolerate so much, because if it gets too high, then it kills all the cells, right? So everything here is limited by what is actually the total amount of vanillin produced during the batch fermentation, which is based on these factors here around total yield and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm gonna refine this a little bit and massage some of the numbers, because the cost I have here for ferulic acid production is really high. It's at $4.50 per kilogram. If we zoom in down here, and that's too high. We both know that's too high. I think that has a lot to do with the cost that I have here. There's a lot of assumptions around like total plant cost. So we can work on those numbers some more. But importantly is that, like, if we use the same assumptions to get plant cost, then those assumptions carry over to our cell-free systems, then it's okay to do that. But we can get more refined numbers to make this better. We know 450 is too high. We'll work on that. I'm going to work on it still tonight. But I wanted to talk about it and send this to you while my brain is still working relatively well. Okay, so that was ferulic acid. Eugenol here, like the only thing that really changes is that the cost goes down. So eugenol is $50 per kilogram instead of $180 per kilogram. The yield on eugenol changes slightly, but it doesn't affect it much. I'm using like the best yields for fermentation that are in literature. I'm not like cherry picking numbers that are lower. I'm taking like the best yields from literature. And I'm also assuming that they're able to operate at the highest possible concentration of vanillin without at the solubility limit at a reasonable temperature, at room temperature for these tanks, and that's 10 grams per liter. So that's also around like the toxicity limit for cells that we see in literature. So that's where all those numbers are coming from. It's all based in literature. I'm not cherry picking stuff. This is like pretty decent in my mind from a TEM. When we get to cell-free, here are the assumptions I am making. Because the point of making a TEM, right, is it's not like, oh, this is what it would be right now because we're at a technology readiness level of 3. It's like we're at technology readiness level of 4. The point of doing the TM is like if things work as we envision and we're able to do the process optimization that we envision, this is what we would do. This is what we would achieve. And importantly, I'm not like being overly optimistic here. I sent you that paper earlier for a reason, to read. Because a lot of the important numbers that I get here and the assumptions I make come from those ballpark numbers from that paper I sent you that's written by James Bowie at UCLA. So the assumptions I'm making for cell-free, and I'm going to go to here because this is actually where all that is written. Okay, so the first assumption I make is that instead of using a batch process, we use a CSTR system or a continually fed stirred tank reactor. That's that thing I told you about earlier today, where instead of using one single big tank, you have a couple of tanks in a line. From that, we assume that we also have, in addition to that, we also assume that because we're doing cell-free, we have higher volumetric productivity. I am very conservatively only saying we have 5x volumetric productivity over fermentation. You'll have read in that James Bowie paper that it's very common to see an order of magnitude increase in volumetric productivity over fermentation with cell-free. So this number being 10x will be perfectly reasonable. I'm keeping it at 5x because I don't want to be overly optimistic. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm saying we're only recycling the spores 5 times. I'm not going too crazy and saying we do 10 times. If we change this even lower, only go to 3, it doesn't have that big of, it's like you're still saving money. And it's not like the most sensitive thing on the chart with these high value substrates. So not that big of a deal at this point in time, more about enzyme stability and stuff like that, so that we can do these higher temperatures. With our enzymes, I'm also assuming we can do a higher temperature, which increases our solubility, which increases our max titer. For vanillin, I'm assuming we can operate at a temperature around 50 degrees, which increases the solubility to about this. Yeah. From there, all these numbers just come in and play in down here, just like they did in fermentation, and they come across here. I get yearly totals for the whole year. So total cost for glucose for the year, total cost of feedstock for the year, total cost of this should say feedstock, not eugenol. I did my first draft with eugenol and then changed everything to just say feedstock as I put in the other numbers. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so here's one of the important things. So if we have 5x productivity, and we also can have volumetric productivity, and we also can have higher titers, that means that for our investment in our factory, right, we're increasing how much vanillin we can make with the same amount of investment, right? So for let's look at fermentation from eugenol. This is about 17,000 kilograms or 17 metric tons of vanillin. That's how much this theoretical plant could process. For context, Solvay is expanding their footprint to make like 120. I think 120. No, was it 60 metric tons? 60 metric tons. 60 metric tons. Hold on, let me check I just read this. It doesn't matter. Solvay is doing like 60 or 120 kilogram, 160 to 120 metric tons on their future plants that they're planning. So super relevant there. That being said, we should talk about Solvay just like having a complete foothold on the market for vanillin, and maybe we need to do something else if they're already building that infrastructure, but we can still talk about Vanillin for this week. Frankly, it's fine as a test case. Okay, from there, sorry, I'm rambling now. It is getting late. Okay, so like I said, for fermentation from eugenol, I said 17 metric tons. If we are improving our titer and our volumetric productivity, then we're looking at 100 metric tons. So increasing productivity 5-fold effectively, right? So that is how those numbers work. Yeah. Let's see, what else was I gonna say? Okay, let's go back to now that I've shown you this, let's just go back to, okay, and then for lignin. For lignin, these are the assumptions I make, because this is important. I made a base assumption for the cost of lignin at $660 per ton of dry lignin. That was the average cost in like 2019 I saw. I also made an assumption around the cost of our lignin pre-processing unit. So I said for lignin, assume $2 million additional capital cost for a lignin pre-treatment tank. That does not say tank, it says ank. Boop. Okay. So that is reflected in a higher total plant cost for lignin and the amortization of or depreciation of that plant cost over a 20-year period, which is in the cost down here. To make these bar charts that you saw on the first tab, let me zoom back out. Okay. To make these bar charts that you saw on the first tab, what this is I just took the total cost to operate for a year, turned those into percentages. So this is every unit cost up here, total cost of operating for a year here. Turned those into percentages here, converted those into percentages of the cost per kilogram, and then those then act as stacked bar charts to make these this graph here, which has the relative cost per kilogram with the percentage breakdown of where the cost comes from. So this is not perfect. Like I said, the cost for fermentation is too high right now. That has a lot to do with the scale of the plant and the total cost that comes from labor and things. Whereas if the scale was larger, those costs would be lower and reduce the cost per kilogram. So we can optimize around that in future discussions and as I read more. But overall, this should certainly act as a foundation for us to have a pretty good TEM moving forward. I apologize for this video being 13 minutes long. Hopefully it is useful. I wanted to send it because I know you were excited to see this, and I was excited to wrap it up. And importantly, this whole thing, I set it up so that if we change, if I come here to cell-free for ferulic acid and I change the input cost here, that's going to change these graphs on the front page automatically. So everything is very dynamic, easily tunable as we, get feedback and as we adapt this to other processes as well. And then, so I think what we have now is we have a baseline techno-economic model, and we can just adapt this to anything and without too much effort. So, yeah. Also, I put it in the Caravel OneDrive folder. This one that has everything in it. It's called Vanillin, Cell-Free and Fermentation, TEM. Okay, talk to you in the morning.